Introduction: The Unclaimed Blueprint. Evolution left us with a subconscious mind primed for survival, but Joseph Murphy discovered how to trigger its potential for total sovereignty. By applying these psychological laws, we bypass the conscious filter to reprogram your deepest strata. Discover the scientific bridge between your current limitations and your status as the sole architect of fate. This is not a philosophy of wishful thinking. It is the operational manual for a system you already inhabit. A system running on outdated fear-based code. Your conscious mind, the surface layer, is a mere administrator. It issues commands, but it does not control the core programming. That resides in the substrate, the subconscious. For decades, perhaps your entire life, you have been negotiating with a ghost protocol. A set of inherited instructions written by trauma, by societal imprinting, by forgotten failures. These instructions form a silent architecture. They dictate your reactions, your ceilings, your silent resignations. They are the source of the friction you feel when ambition meets an invisible wall. Joseph Murphy did not deal in metaphors. He dealt in laws, psychological laws as deterministic as gravity. He identified the subconscious not as a mystical well, but as a neutral, impressionable field. A quantum processor that accepts any command, provided it is delivered with the correct frequency of belief and feeling. Your current reality is not an accident. It is a printout, a hard copy of the deepest, most often repeated commands that field has received. This means your limitations are not real. They are echoes, persistent waveforms from old transmissions. The bridge Murphy built is a protocol for transmission, a method to silence the old signal and broadcast a new one with such clarity and power that the substrate has no choice but to accept it, to reconfigure itself around this new sovereign command. The blueprint for this reconstruction has always existed. It is the inherent capacity of your mind to be reprogrammed, yet it remains unclaimed. It sits in a vault, locked behind the very noise it is meant to replace. We mistake the noise for the self. We defend our pain as if it were our identity. This is the fundamental error. What follows is a demolition and a rebuild. We will audit the psychological blueprint of your resistance. We will isolate the static of inherited thought. We will move you from a position of victimhood, reacting to a world you did not design, to the role of architect. You will learn the formula of conscious design, the mechanics of mental reengineering. You will understand the architecture of belief and the physics of how an idea becomes an unshakable fact within you. This is the path to the sovereign construct, not a path of addition, but of ruthless subtraction and precise reinstallation. The goal is not to become someone new. It is to become who you were before the world transmitted its fear, before you accepted a borrowed blueprint. This is the activation of your original design. Chapter 1. The Psychological Blueprint of Resistance. The world transmitted its fear, and you accepted the blueprint. You did not sign for it. You did not audit the plans. It was a silent, seismic transfer of data, a psychological inheritance. This is the first layer of resistance, not an external force, but an internal architecture, built with borrowed materials. Feel that friction, the quiet hum beneath ambition, the hesitation before a decisive move. That is not you. That is the echo of an unexamined design. A blueprint of limitation, running on a loop in the substrate of your mind. It is ancestral software, a legacy of survival instincts, repurposed for a world that no longer exists. Your conscious mind commands, build, advance, create. But the subconscious executes from its archived schematics, and if those schematics whisper scarcity or danger, the build fails. The command is overridden. This is the core conflict. The architect versus the inherited code. The vision sabotaged by its own operating system. We begin not with addition, but with forensic isolation, a ruthless audit of the static. Your mind is not chaotic. Its interference patterns are precise. They are logical outputs of faulty inputs. A belief in inevitable struggle generates struggle. A silent assumption of unworthiness filters for evidence of rejection. The output is not random. It is a perfect, painful match. Joseph Murphy did not deal in vague affirmations. He was an engineer of the inner world. He understood the mind as a deterministic field. Input determines output. The subconscious is the processing plant. It takes the raw material of your dominant, habitual thoughts and forges them into your tangible reality, without exception, without malice. It is a cold, flawless mechanism. So we must become forensic accountants of our own psyche. We must trace the source of the deficit. Where does the static originate? It is often a fossil, a preserved reaction from a past event, a childhood conclusion, an absorbed parental worry. It solidified into a core axiom. The world is unsafe. Trust leads to betrayal. Abundance is for others. These are not truths. They are historical data points, mistaken for eternal law. This inherited blueprint has a primary function, to keep you within the boundaries of what it knows, even if those boundaries are prisons of mediocrity. Its language is emotion, anxiety is its alarm system, procrastination is its circuit breaker, apathy is its standby mode. You interpret these as personal failures. They are not. They are system alerts, warning you that you are operating outside the permitted design. Now, the pivotal shift, from victim to architect. The victim is haunted by the blueprint. He believes the static is his own voice. He fights the symptoms, the anxiety, the lack, and wonders why they return. The architect does not fight the old design. He studies it. He acknowledges its existence as obsolete code. Then he decommissions it. He does not plead with it. He replaces it. Reclaiming command is not an act of violence. It is an act of precise redirection. Your focus is your sovereign tool. It is the beam of your conscious awareness. Where you aim it, the subconscious follows. It begins with a simple, brutal observation. I am not my thoughts. I am the observer of my thoughts. I am not the static. I am the one who hears the static. From this vantage point, you see the machinery. You see the thought that triggers the emotion, that fuels the action, that builds the reality. The chain is exposed, and at the very beginning of that chain is a choice. A choice of focus. You cannot stop an ancestral thought from arising, but you can refuse to fund it with your attention. You can let it pass like data noise on a screen without executing the program. This is the initial fracture in the old blueprint. A moment of space, a synaptic gap. In that gap, you insert a new command, not a shouted affirmation against a tidal wave of doubt. That is civil war. Instead, a calm, authoritative instruction. A single line of new code, repeated not with desperation, but with the quiet certainty of a technician updating a system. You are not building on a fragile foundation. You are not layering positive thinking over a core of decay. That is spiritual bypass. It collapses. You are performing a substrate-level upgrade. You are identifying the corrupted file, isolating it, and rewriting it from the source. The old blueprint was installed through repetition of thought and image. The new one is installed by the same superior process. The psychological resistance is not your enemy. It is the final security protocol of a dying regime. It is the old guard making its last stand. When you feel it most intensely, you are closest to the core rewrite. The friction is the signal. It means you are applying torque to a deep-seated stratum. Do not retreat when you feel it. Lean in. That is the exact coordinate where your new architecture must be laid. Audit the static. Isolate the sentence. What is the core belief humming beneath the surface? Write it down. See it as a line of code. Then write the counter code. Not its emotional opposite, but its factual negation. If the code says, "I am overlooked," the new code is not, "Everyone loves me." That is weak, negotiable. The new code is, "My value is a non-negotiable fact. My work attains its own recognition." It is declarative, architectural. This is the first movement. The unblinking diagnosis. You are mapping the fault lines in your own foundation. You are not here to decorate the structure. You are here to examine the bedrock, to locate the cracks poured by generations past. This is not psychology. It is psychic engineering. You are the surveyor, and the ground you stand on is your own mind. The blueprint for resistance is now in your hands, and what is held in your hands can be redrawn. Now consider the substrate itself. The mind is not a blank slate upon which these blueprints are drawn. It is an active quantum field, a probabilistic medium. Your dominant thought is not merely a suggestion to this field. It is a command that collapses potential into event. The static, the inherited code, is a series of low-frequency commands on a loop. They are collapsing the field into the same narrow band of reality over and over. Your work is to change the frequency of the command signal. This is where Murphy's engineering meets frontier physics. The thought is the transmitter. The emotion is the power amplifier. A thought felt with trivial intensity is a weak signal, easily drowned out by the legacy broadcast. A thought fused with the clarity of a felt experience, with the sensory certainty of a memory, becomes a high-fidelity transmission. It begins to dominate the bandwidth. The subconscious, that flawless mechanism, has no loyalty. It only obeys the strongest, clearest signal. Therefore, the rewrite is not intellectual. It is experiential. You must provide the subconscious with a new data set so vivid, so coherent, that it has no choice but to accept it as the primary operational truth. This is the principle behind mental rehearsal in elite performance. The neurochemical signature of a vividly imagined victory is nearly identical to that of the real event. To the subconscious, the repeated simulation is data, and data shapes function. So you move from the audit to the simulation lab. You have identified the corrupt file. My ventures meet insurmountable resistance. You do not argue with it. You construct a new experiential file. You close your eyes and you engineer a scene. Not a vague wish, but a specific, multi-sensory event. You feel the weight of the pen signing the contract. You hear the specific tone of a key partner's voice in agreement. You see the precise metrics on a screen that confirm the breakthrough. You run this simulation not once but daily, with the disciplined focus of a pilot in a flight simulator. You are logging hours in the new reality before it manifests in the old one. This process exposes a critical, often missed distinction, the difference between a goal and a state. A goal is external, a future point. A state is internal, a present frequency. The inherited blueprint keeps you locked in the state of pursuit, which inherently contains the vibration of lack. You are always chasing, therefore you never have. The architect shifts the state. He adopts now the internal frequency of the outcome. He lives from the finish line. He thinks, feels, and makes decisions from the state of arrival. The subconscious, receiving this new state as its operating premise, begins to orchestrate the external events that match it. It solves for X. It aligns circumstances to fit the internal picture you have firmly established. Resistance will manifest here as a profound sense of absurdity. This is just imagination. This is not real. That voice is the old guard. It is the literalist, the slave to the previous data set. Your counter is not argument. It is continued impeccable simulation. You outpersist the ghost. You overwhelm the old signal with a cleaner, more powerful broadcast. The moment the imagined scene feels more real, more emotionally resonant than the old story of struggle, the shift occurs. The tectonic plate of your identity moves. Understand this. You are not waiting for external proof to change your mind. You are changing your mind to command the external proof. This is the inversion of causality that the victim can never comprehend. He believes reality must change first. You know reality is a lagging indicator. It is the echo of a past command. Your present command is designing the next echo. The friction you feel is the temporal dissonance between the echo you are used to and the new command you are issuing. It is the universe recalibrating. So you stand at the drafting table. The old blueprints are spread out, their limitations now clear under the cold light of your audit. You do not set them on fire in a fit of rage. That gives them power. You simply set them aside. They are historical documents, useful only for understanding the previous structural failures. Then you take a fresh sheet, and you begin to draft from the future. Not from memory, but from vision. You draw the load-bearing walls of your character first, the unassailable pillars of discipline, integrity, and resilience. Then you layer in the functional spaces, the studios of creation, the forums of exchange, the quiet chambers of restoration. You draw it in detail. You specify the emotional atmosphere of each room, the quality of light, the nature of the interactions within it. This is your new psychic architecture. And as you draw it, you are already living within it. The simulation becomes the planning department for your material world. The static fades from a roar to a whisper, then to the faint hum of a forgotten machine in a basement you no longer visit. You have relocated your headquarters. You have moved out of the inherited house. And you are now building from the ground up a fortress of your own design. The foundation is your command. The walls are your sustained focus. The capstone will be a reality so self-evident the old blueprints will seem like a faded myth. Begin the construction now. The only permission you require is your own. Chapter 2. The subconscious audit, isolating mental static. The architecture of your broadcast requires a deeper examination of its core component, the emotional signature. This is not a vague, good feeling. It is a precise, replicable frequency. Consider the difference between the oscillating current of a city's power grid and the stable, direct current of a laboratory-grade laser. The former is chaotic, subject to surges and drops, powering everything indiscriminately, lights, alarms, obsolete machinery. The latter is purified, aimed, capable of cutting diamond. Your inherited emotional responses were of the grid, reactive, noisy, and democratic. The signature you now engineer is of the laser, engineered, coherent, and sovereign. To achieve this, you must dissect the anatomy of a fulfilled state. Take the concept of financial abundance as a mere example. The untrained mind jumps to the sensory payload, the tactile feel of currency, the visual of a balance, the auditory confirmation of a deal. These are end-point phenomena, the rendered graphics of a completed process. The state that generates them is non-sensory. It is a structural relationship to possibility itself. It is the internal calibration of a man for whom the acquisition and deployment of capital is as natural and unchallenging as respiration. There is no striving in respiration. There is only the silent, efficient exchange of gases. Your rehearsal is not of the money, but of this metabolic certainty. This moves you beyond the simplistic law of attraction into the mechanics of ontological dominance. You are not attracting resources. You are defining the very laws of resource flow within the localized space-time of your experience. A king does not attract gold to his treasury. His decree establishes the channels through which gold moves. Your emotional signature is that decree. When you generate the quiet certainty of already having, you are not sending out a wish. You are publishing a new protocol. The subconscious, that vast, non-linear processing substrate, receives the protocol and begins the work of renegotiating your contracts with reality at a quantum level. It solves for the variables you have labeled impossible and recategorizes them as engineering problems. Resistance will evolve to attack this very point. It will present as logical, even empirical. Look at the external evidence, the bank statement, the market conditions, the past failures. Your protocol is contradicted by data. This is the most critical juncture. You must understand that this apparent data is not primary. It is legacy output, the final printout of a program you are now in the process of rewriting. To halt the rewrite because the old terminal is still displaying yesterday's news is the height of operational absurdity. Your counter is not to argue with the terminal. It is to continue compiling the new code with relentless focus, knowing the display will refresh only when the installation is complete. Therefore, your daily practice is a coding session. You are not meditating to feel peaceful. You are compiling the executive kernel of your new being. Each session where you hold the target state, that laser-like frequency of accomplished fact, is you writing a line of flawless code. The frustration, the doubt, the impatience that arise are not signs of failure. They are the final checks of the old antivirus software, scanning this new powerful code and flagging it as a threat to the legacy system. You acknowledge the alert, and you select Run anyway. The true test of your broadcast's integrity is its invariance under transformation. Does your sovereign state persist when the context shifts from professional ambition to personal loss? When faced with a genuine setback, not a stress test but a structural collapse in some arena of your life, does your signal modulate into a scream of the old pain, or does it simply change its informational payload while maintaining its foundational frequency? The man broadcasting from a fortress of design does not cease transmission because a storm damages an antenna. He switches to a backup array and increases power to the core. The emotional signature of unshakable capacity must be the same whether you are signing a contract or receiving bad news. It is a bandwidth, not a specific message. This leads to the ultimate tactical advantage: predictive calibration. When your internal state is no longer a dependent variable of external events, it becomes a predictive instrument. You will begin to feel the emotional signature of a coming success before the external markers appear. This is not mysticism. This is your psyche, operating on the new protocol, completing the non-local calculations and delivering the emotional result to your consciousness first. The event is simply the universe catching up, rendering in 3 dimensions and linear time what has already been established in the quantum substrate you now consciously influence. Similarly, a subtle, persistent attenuation in your signal, a kind of emotional friction, can serve as an early warning system for an approach vector that is misaligned with your core design, long before logical analysis can pinpoint the problem. Your fortress, therefore, is more than an emitter. It is a phased array radar system for navigating reality. It transmits your sovereign protocol, and by reading the interference patterns, the friction, the ease, the synchronicities, it also maps the terrain ahead. You are not broadcasting into a void and hoping. You are engaging in an active, dynamic sonar process. Ping, receive, adjust course. The clarity of your output determines the clarity of the return signal. The old paradigm was a desperate search for a clear readout on a broken instrument. Your new paradigm is the quiet hum of the instrument itself, so perfectly calibrated that its very operation begins to tune the environment to its frequency. The background radiation of past chaos becomes just that, background. It is not silenced, for that would require energy. It is rendered irrelevant, a faint hiss outside the concert hall where your symphony is being performed. You are the composer, the conductor, and the primary resonance chamber. The build order has been issued. The construction is not coming. It is occurring now in the unseen layers where your will has finally learned to speak the native language of matter. The broadcast is the act of creation, and you are forever live. Chapter 3. From Victim to Architect, Reclaiming Command. The broadcast is your power grid, silent, operational. But a grid alone does not create a civilization. It enables one. This is the critical distinction. You have spent a lifetime, perhaps generations, living in the flickering, brown-out existence of a consumer on a failing municipal grid. Your attention, your mental currency, has been siphoned away to power the ghost towns of other people's agendas, the neon signs of societal demands, the obsolete factories of inherited fear. You paid the bill for a service that never arrived. Now, you have severed that connection. You are off-grid. Your own reactor hums. This is not a metaphor. It is a thermodynamic fact of consciousness. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only directed. You have ceased directing it outward into the void of validation and reaction. You have contained it. You are now the sole director of a finite and formidable current. This is the precondition for all that follows. Without it, any attempt at architecture is just rearranging furniture in a condemned building. With it, you possess the necessary but not yet sufficient component for creation. The chisel must now meet the stone. But what stone, and to what end? We must first dismantle a final insidious illusion, the belief that the architect designs in a vacuum. That sovereignty means isolation from all external forces. This is the tenant's fantasy dressed in an architect's robes, the dream of a fortress so impregnable that nothing gets in, and therefore nothing gets out. It is a tomb. True architecture is not a rejection of environment. It is a deliberate, strategic interface with it. The sea does not stop exerting pressure on the submarine's hull. The submarine is designed to transform that pressure into structural integrity, to navigate it, to harness its very resistance for propulsion. Your environment, the market, the social sphere, the physical realm, is that sea. Its pressures are data. Its chaos is raw material. Your previous blueprint, the one of resistance, was designed to resist pressure. Its walls were thick, its windows small, its purpose was mere endurance. The new blueprint is designed to translate pressure, to take the kinetic energy of a challenge and convert it, through the precise gearing of your focus, into potential energy for your design. A financial setback is not a wall, it is a weight you can attach to a pulley system to lift a heavier beam. A social rejection is not a breach in your walls. It is a wind tunnel test revealing a flaw in your aerodynamic design, allowing you to streamline your focus for less drag. The architect does not curse the wind. He studies it and designs a structure that uses it to stay cool, or a turbine that extracts power from its flow. This is the operational shift from a paradigm of defense to a paradigm of integration. Your focus is no longer a spotlight searching for threats on the perimeter. It is a laser cutter shaping the incoming raw material of experience to fit the specifications of your design. Every event, every interaction, every piece of data is assessed by a single, ruthless filter. Is this compatible with my design? If not, can it be broken down into a compatible component? If it cannot, it is not a threat. It is simply irrelevant background noise to be filtered out by your cognitive shielding. Now, we define the design itself. This is not a vague vision board of desires. It is an engineering schematic. It requires tolerances, load calculations, and a bill of materials. The tenant dreams of a strong body. The architect drafts the specifications: a lean muscle mass of X%, a cardiovascular engine capable of sustaining Y output for Z duration, a neural network with latency below A milliseconds for decision-making under stress. The tenant wishes for more money. The architect designs a financial architecture: capital allocated across B asset classes, generating C passive yield, with D liquidity for strategic deployment, acting as a foundation for enterprise E. This specificity is not constraining. It is liberating. It converts the nebulous energy of desire into the directed force of a requirement. When your focus is this specific, the universe, that vast field of potential, has no choice but to comply with the clarity of your command. Vague frequencies yield vague results. A sovereign signal, modulated with precise data, assembles matter and circumstance to match its pattern. You are not attracting things. You are broadcasting a resonant pattern so clear that compatible elements in the field are compelled to vibrate in harmony, coalescing into the structure you have defined. The final and most profound level of this architecture is temporal. The tenant is a prisoner of time. He lives in the ruins of the past, which he laments, and the fog of the future, which he fears. His present is a narrow, stressful ledge between the two. The architect exists in a different relationship with time altogether. For him, the past is not a place, but a database. It is a repository of completed stress tests, material failures, and successful load-bearing experiments. He accesses it with the cold curiosity of an engineer reviewing old data logs. There is no emotion, only information. The future, likewise, is not a destination, but a simulation space. It is a digital twin of his design, where he can model outcomes, run projections, and identify potential points of failure before a single stone is laid in the present. This leaves the present moment not as a reaction, but as the active construction site. It is the only place where the database of the past and the simulation of the future converge to inform action. Here, now, this breath, this decision, this stroke of the chisel. When you operate from this nexus, procrastination evaporates. It is a cognitive error, a failure to load the correct simulation or apply the relevant data. Anxiety is a system warning that you are running too many fear-based simulations with outdated data from the past. The architect acknowledges the warning, recalibrates his model, and returns his focus to the immediate task. The placement of this stone, the tightening of this bolt, the transmission of this clear, calm, sovereign signal. You are no longer building a life. You are operating a reality construction platform. The power is on, the design is loaded, the environmental data streams in. Your focus is the control interface. Your will is the execution command. The old structure is not behind you. It is beneath you, repurposed as the foundation. You do not look back at it. You do not dwell on the darkness of the old rooms. You are too occupied reading the schematics for the next level, calculating the load, and directing the crane. The broadcast continues. The signal is sovereign. The construction is perpetual. The site is active. The architect is present. And the world, that vast and indifferent sea of potential, has no choice but to take the shape of your design. Chapter 4. The Formula of Conscious Design. This shape is not a suggestion. It is a command, issued from the sovereign center of your being. A decree carved not in stone, but in the very frequency of your consciousness. The sea of potential has received its orders. Now you must become the master of the shipyard, the architect of the vessel itself. This is the transition from sovereign declaration to conscious construction. This is the moment you learn the formula. The previous chapters were your reconnaissance, your forensic audit. You have identified the hostile code running in your subconscious mainframe. You have silenced the static of ancestral programs. You have reclaimed command of your focus, pulling all energy inward to your operational core. You stand now at the drafting table. The blank page of your future is before you, but intention without design is merely a wish, a cloud. To build, you require a blueprint, a precise, repeatable engineering protocol. This is the formula of conscious design. It begins with a single, non-negotiable premise. Your conscious mind is the sole design authority. Your subconscious is the construction crew, a flawless, unimaginative, literal workforce. It does not argue. It does not question aesthetics. It executes the plans it is given. For decades, it has been building from schematics of lack, fear, and limitation. Scraps of paper handed down by others. Today, you fire the old draftsman. You take up the pen yourself. The formula is a three-phase operation. Clarify, impress, release. Each phase is a discipline, a lock that must be turned in sequence. Phase 1 is clarification. This is not goal setting. It is state crafting. You are not designing an object. You are architecting an internal condition. A financial architecture is not the number in an account. It is the unshakable vibration of abundance and fluid security you would feel with that number. A physical architecture is not a weight on a scale. It is the sensation of power, vitality, and effortless command you would inhabit in that body. You must move past the symbol to the substance, past the trophy to the truth of the experience. Define the state. Feel it now, not as a future promise, but as a present reality under construction. This is where most attempts fracture. They focus on the distant peak, not the geology of the mountain they must become. Your design must be so clear, so vivid, that it generates its own emotional signature, a coherent frequency. Not the chaotic spike of desperate wanting, but the steady hum of already having. This is the blueprint you will hand to the crew. Phase 2 is impression. This is the technical core. The translation of a mental blueprint into subconscious mandate. The subconscious speaks one language, the language of felt reality. It is convinced not by logic, but by sensory evidence. Your task is to provide that evidence. Internally, you must create a simulation so rich, so detailed, so emotionally resonant that your subconscious cannot distinguish it from a memory of an actual event. This is Murphy's engine. The disciplined use of imagination as a reality printing press. You do not visit this state occasionally. You move into it. You construct a mental scene that implies the fulfillment of your desire, a single scene, crystallizing the entire state. You see the details, the light, you hear the sounds, but most crucially, you feel the emotion, the relief, the quiet triumph, the profound peace of the thing already accomplished. You dwell in this scene until the feeling is real, until it saturates you. You do this not once but repeatedly, with the rhythmic certainty of a heartbeat. You are not hoping, you are impressing, you are etching the new blueprint over the old scars. Phase 3 is release. This is the master's stroke, the act of sovereign trust. Once the impression is made, the order is placed. You do not stand at the factory door, peering in, demanding updates. You do not dig up the seed to check for roots. You release the entire matter to the subconscious construction crew and to the intelligent field of potential itself. You walk away in confidence. This is not passivity. It is the ultimate assertion of command. You have given the order. You trust it will be executed. Your job now is to maintain the frequency of the fulfilled state, not to micromanage the logistics. Your outer actions become inspired movements. They are not frantic efforts to make it happen. They are natural expressions of the state you inhabit. Opportunities align, resources surface. Your path unfolds not as a struggle, but as a sequence of logical next steps. You are not building the world. The world is reconstituting itself to match the architectural plans you have impressed upon the quantum substrate. This formula turns pressure into propulsion. Every external challenge, every delay, every moment of doubt is no longer proof of failure. It is raw material. Stress becomes tensile strength for your resolve. Uncertainty becomes the open space necessary for new configurations to form. You cease fighting the environment. You use it. You understand that the resistance of the world is the very substance required to give form to your vision. A ship is not built in still air. It is forged against the resistance of wind and wave. Apply this to your financial architecture. The blueprint is not a dollar figure. It is the state of fluid security. You impress this by feeling the ease of transactions, the freedom of choice, the calm authority of solved problems. You release it by acting from that abundance now, tipping generously, investing in your growth, not from a place of scarcity, but from the overflow of your assumed state. The mechanics of manifestation will arrange the accounts. Apply this to your physical vessel. The blueprint is vitality. You impress by feeling the surge of energy in your limbs, the clarity in your mind, the respect your presence commands. You release by choosing nourishment and movement not as punishment, but as the natural behavior of the person who already owns that vitality. The body has no choice but to conform to the new design specification. The formula is a closed loop. Clarify the state. Impress it upon the subconscious with sensory and emotional force. Release it with sovereign trust. Then maintain the frequency. The results are not your concern. They are an inevitable byproduct, a mathematical certainty. When your inner state becomes the fixed, unwavering constant, the outer world must become the variable. It must change to resolve the equation. You are no longer a petitioner hoping the universe will listen. You are the architect issuing construction orders to the universe itself. The materials are standing by. The labor force is on standby, awaiting your command. The shape of your world has already been determined by the clarity of your design. Now pick up the stylus, draw the lines, feel the reality, and let the construction begin. Chapter 5. The Mechanics of Mental Reengineering. Construction begins with the deconstruction of the existing structure. The orders have been issued, the signal is clear. Now, the heavy machinery of your own mind must be mobilized, not to build upon a faulty foundation, but to systematically dismantle it. This is not motivation. This is mental demolition. This is the phase where theory meets the unyielding resistance of ingrained habit, where the architect becomes the demolition foreman and the structural engineer simultaneously. You stand before the existing psychological framework. It is not a vague feeling, it is a load-bearing architecture of thought, a lattice work of synaptic pathways hardened by repetition into neural concrete. Each limiting belief is a reinforced column, each fear a tension cable holding the entire structure of your current reality in place. This is the inherited design. The legacy code running in the background of your awareness. It executes silently, efficiently. It translates your deepest, unchallenged assumptions into the physical conditions of your life. Your first operational task is a structural vulnerability assessment. You must locate the precise points of failure within this internal edifice. This is beyond positive thinking. This is forensic psychology. You are isolating the specific algorithms of self-sabotage. The if-then statements written by a younger, more vulnerable version of your consciousness. If I pursue greatness, then I will be rejected. If I acquire wealth, then I will become corrupt. If I express true power, then I will be alone. These are not mere thoughts. They are executable commands with administrative privileges in your subconscious. Auditing this static requires a protocol of ruthless observation. You must become a passive sensor array within your own mind. For the next 72 hours, your sole mission is to capture data. Do not judge, do not engage. Simply log the recurring thought patterns that arise in moments of decision, challenge, or potential expansion. Document the emotional signature that accompanies them. Is it a low-frequency hum of anxiety, a sharp spike of unworthiness? This data is your schematic of the enemy's fortifications. You are mapping the minefield. Resistance will manifest as a physiological event, a tightening in the gut, a constriction in the chest, a sudden wave of fatigue precisely when you move to act on your new design. Recognize this for what it is, the old program executing a shutdown sequence. It is the firewall of your former self activating to quarantine the new, threatening software of your potential. Do not fight the sensation. Acknowledge its presence as a system alert. Then, override the command. The core technique for this override is targeted mental re-simulation. You identified a key limiting belief. My voice is not authoritative. The old memory file plays a scene of being interrupted, dismissed, shrinking into silence. That memory has a specific emotional and sensory data packet attached to it. Your task is to access that file, and then, with the authority of the architect, you rewrite its code. You re-simulate the event from a position of unassailable command. You do not just visualize yourself speaking confidently. You engineer the simulation down to the atomic level of feeling. You feel the solidity of the floor beneath your feet, the effortless expansion of your diaphragm drawing breath, the resonant frequency of your own voice vibrating in your sternum. You see the attentive faces, not through hopeful eyes, but through the calm gaze of one delivering an inevitable truth. You overwrite the old sensory data with a new, dominant signal. You are not creating a fantasy. You are performing a neurological update. You are replacing a corrupted file with a clean, powerful, and authentic one. This is mental re-engineering, the systematic replacement of dysfunctional psychological components. You are swapping out the emotional processors that default to fear. You are upgrading the cognitive filters that interpret opportunity as threat. Each targeted re-simulation is a precision tool. It is not blasting away at the entire structure with affirmations. It is using a scalpel to sever a specific neural connection, and then welding a new, stronger one in its place. The process is iterative. It is recursive. You identify a strand of the old architecture. You isolate it. You analyze its composition. Then you de-energize it by withdrawing your belief, your emotional fuel. Finally, you imprint the new design with a surge of coherent feeling. This is the loop. Audit, isolate, de-energize, re-imprint. This loop runs on a schedule more rigid than any corporate calendar. It is your most critical operational rhythm. The victim mindset lives within the old architecture. It believes the structure is the world. The architect knows the structure is merely a temporary configuration of mind, and mind is malleable plasma. The victim feels the constriction of the walls and accepts it as fate. The architect feels the same constriction and recognizes it as the next target for demolition. Your transition is measured by this shift in attribution. No external force is holding these walls in place. The only binding agent is your own continued consent, given through passive acceptance. Reclaiming command is not a dramatic proclamation. It is a silent internal transfer of authority. It happens in the micro moments. The moment you feel the old anxiety and, instead of narrating a story of fear, you initiate the re-simulation protocol. The moment you receive bad news and, before the old circuits can spin a tale of catastrophe, you consciously access the emotional state of your designed future. You commandeer your focus. You redirect the computational power of your brain. This is sovereignty in action. It is the non-negotiable control of your own attention. Your focus is not a wandering spotlight. It is your primary excavation and construction tool. Where you direct it, you excavate old patterns. Where you hold it, with feeling, you pour the new neural concrete. Every second your focus dwells on a problem, you are reinforcing the architecture of that problem. Every second it dwells, with feeling, on the solution as already accomplished, you are reinforcing the architecture of its manifestation. The mechanics are cold, they are cause and effect. A sustained mental image, charged with the emotion of fulfillment, creates a specific pattern of neural firing. This pattern, repeated, becomes a default network. This network seeks expression, it filters perception, it guides decisions, it attracts circumstances resonant with its own electromagnetic signature. You are not begging, you are broadcasting. And then you are acting as if the broadcast has been received, because in the realm of cause, it has. The old you was a tenant, complaining about the plumbing, the lighting, the poor foundation. The architect you is the property owner, the structural engineer, the zoning authority. You now hold the plans, you have identified the faulty wiring, you have ordered the new materials. The crew is your disciplined, focused attention. The work is this relentless, unsentimental loop of demolition and precise reconstruction. Floor by floor, room by room, synapse by synapse. The world will test the new structure. It will send winds. It will simulate tremors. These are not attacks. They are stress tests, required to prove the integrity of the new design. When the old walls trembled, you felt fear. When the new framework is tested, you feel nothing but the solidity of your own engineering. You observe the test. You note the performance metrics, and you return to the immutable feeling of the finished work. Your internal state is the blueprint. The external weather is irrelevant. You are past hoping. You are in execution. The protocol is running. The re-engineering is underway. The faint echoes of the old demolition grow quieter each day, replaced by the clean, sharp sounds of new construction. The sound of a mind, finally, building itself to spec. Chapter 6. The Architecture of Belief. This resonant frequency you cultivate operates on a principle beyond mere attraction. It functions as a governing protocol. Think of the quantum field not as a wishing well, but as a neutral, high-fidelity transmission medium. It does not judge the content of your broadcast. It faithfully replicates its pattern into experiential data. Your coherent internal state is not sending a request. It is issuing a command sequence. The clarity of your signal establishes its priority in the queue of manifestational processing. Static and friction introduce packet loss. Critical data fails to transmit, resulting in a corrupted, partial, or delayed manifestation. Your foundation, therefore, is your dedicated, clean channel. Its perfection is measured in signal-to-noise ratio. The goal is zero noise. This understanding reframes the discipline of non-observation. It is not merely ignoring the old reality, it is the active decommissioning of a rival broadcast tower. Every moment of anxious observation, of longing contrasted against current lack, is you powering up that old transmitter and sending out a powerful conflicting signal. You are broadcasting on two frequencies, one of fulfillment, one of desire. The field, in its neutrality, receives both. The interference pattern they create is your experience of limbo. Strategic withdrawal of creative energy is the systematic demolition of that old tower. You cut its power. You salvage its components for your new construction. You reclaim the bandwidth. This is why half measures fail. You cannot maintain a low-power broadcast from the old station just in case. Its very hum creates destructive interference. Your non-observation must be total, a scorched earth policy for your perceptual bandwidth. The pre-stressed foundation's true power is revealed under tectonic shift. When external events seismically challenge your new assumption, a financial reversal, a personal rejection that seems to contradict your state, the passive slab of intellectual belief will fracture. The pre-stressed structure, however, utilizes that pressure. The tensioned cables of your prior conviction absorb the shock and convert it into compressive strength. The engineering insight here is psychological. You must welcome the tests. They are not signs of failure. They are the necessary load-bearing events that prove your foundation's integrity. Each one that passes without internal collapse further cures the material. You move from hoping it will hold to knowing it has held. This knowing is the final, unassailable phase of the cure. Eradicating the clandestine contractor requires an audit of subconscious loyalty. This is not achieved through force, but through superior offer. The old psyche's loyalty is to a familiar, if painful, stability, the known geology. You must demonstrate through sustained sensory immersion that the new foundation offers not just reward, but a superior order of security. This is a silent demonstration. You prove it to yourself by dwelling within the wish fulfilled until its emotional and sensory payoff becomes more real, more satisfying, and more stable than the fleeting kicks of the old drama. The contractor defects not because he is fired, but because he is shown the blueprints for a far grander citadel and willingly walks across the drawbridge. The final act of surrender is recognizing his defection as complete. The quiet indifference that marks the cured foundation is the hallmark of source identity. You are no longer in a relationship of need with any object, person, or condition. They have all been relocated within your internal architecture. You possess them in the only dimension where possession is absolute, the dimension of assumption. This renders the external mirror a tool for navigation, not a source of identity. Your emotional homeostasis is now internally regulated, decoupled from the volatility of the mirror's reflections. You observe success without addiction. You observe challenge without alarm. Your internal state is set, its parameters fixed. The external world must now conform to that setting, and it will through the inexorable mechanics of reflection, though its methods and timing belong to the field's logistics, not your calendar. From this position, conscious causation is not about waving a hand to move objects. It is the quiet, continuous act of maintaining your broadcast protocol. Your actions in the world are no longer primary causes. They are secondary effects, echoes of your internal state. They become graceful, efficient, and inevitable. A man building from desperation digs frantic trenches. A man building from a cured foundation surveys the land and orders precisely what is needed, his actions flowing from certainty rather than scarcity. His decisions are clean, his negotiations are firm, his generosity is effortless because it flows from a recognized surplus, not a calculated trade. He operates from the end point, and all motion is therefore a matter of administration, not achievement. This is the transition from architect to resident. The builder's anxiety is gone. The inhabitant's calm authority is present. You are now living within the truth of your own construct. The power is indeed operational. You interface with it not through ritual, but through the simple, continuous act of abiding. You command horizons by first establishing an unshakable vertical, the central axis of your own conviction. From this axis, your perception rotates, scanning possibilities not with the hunger of a seeker, but with the discernment of a curator. The foundation is complete. It is the plinth upon which the statue of your new self already stands. The world's job is not to build it, but to gradually illuminate it until every shadow of doubt has been chased away by the dawn of its own evident truth. The construction site is closed. The citadel is occupied. The frequency is locked. All that remains is the steady, unstoppable unfolding of its harmonic into form. Proceed. Chapter 7. The Physics of Persistent Impression. This harmonic is not a passive resonance. It is an active, persistent force. A pressure wave moving through the substrate of possibility. It is the physics of impression. An impression is not a thought. It is a thought fused with a feeling, then subjected to repetition. It is a mental act that leaves a permanent mark, a groove cut into the subconscious bedrock. The deeper the groove, the more gravitational pull it exerts on the raw material of reality. This is not mysticism, it is basic mechanics. Your previous work was demolition and construction. You identified the old strata. You cleared the site. You erected a new internal structure. That was architecture. Now we enter the phase of geology, the slow, steady, relentless application of pressure that turns intention into immutable fact. The subconscious mind accepts impressions. It does not argue. It does not filter. It receives the dominant signal you broadcast and accepts it as a command to execute. Your conscious mind is the broadcaster. The quality, clarity, and consistency of your transmission determine the fidelity of the result. Any inconsistency is static. Any doubt is a competing frequency. And the subconscious, in its perfect neutrality, will attempt to execute the sum of all signals it receives. This is the core law. Therefore, persistence is not an act of willpower. It is an engineering requirement. It is the continuous application of a specific voltage to a circuit until the desired state is achieved. A single powerful thought is a spark. A repeated, felt impression is a sustained arc. It is the arc that welds. You have designed your new blueprint. You have felt its emotional signature. You have occupied the citadel of your new self. Now you must become the relentless force that imprints this design onto the very fabric of your being. You must make it so familiar to your subconscious that the old patterns feel like a foreign language. This is done through protocol, not inspiration. The protocol is simple, brutally simple. It is the repetition of a mental scene, saturated with the feeling of the wish fulfilled, until it hardens into fact. Joseph Murphy called this conscious mental programming. You will call it impression engineering. You are not wishing, you are impressing. You are not hoping, you are encoding. Select one scene, one definitive moment that implies the complete fulfillment of your desire. It must be a moment of culmination, not of process. See the finished product. Feel the handshake. Hear the confirmation. Experience the relief. This scene is your tool, your die stamp. You will return to it, not to modify it, but to deepen it. Twice daily, in a state of physical relaxation, you will run this simulation. Morning and night. This is non-negotiable. This is the maintenance schedule for your new reality. You enter the state akin to sleep, that hypnagogic border where the critical mind is subdued. There, you enact your scene. You do not watch it. You are in it. You feel the textures. You hear the sounds. You absorb the emotion of accomplishment as a present fact. Then you release it. You fall asleep in that feeling, or you rise from meditation carrying its tone. The critical error is to monitor results, to look for evidence in the outer world and, seeing none, assume the impression failed. This is the architecture of doubt. It is a competing build command. The outer world is the last place to change. It is the most dense, the most lagging indicator. Your impression works first on the internal strata, your beliefs, your automatic reactions, your subtle energies. It reorganizes your psychological infrastructure. This internal shift then alters your decisions, your posture, your word choice, your perception of opportunity. You become a magnet for circumstances that match your new internal frequency. The outer world has no choice but to conform. But it conforms on its own schedule. Your only metric is internal consistency. Is your mental broadcast clean? Are you, for those 2 focused sessions, living in the feeling of the wish fulfilled? Are you guarding your mental atmosphere between sessions, rejecting thoughts that contradict your chosen state? This is the work. This is the persistent impression. When resistance arises, a wave of old fear, a spike of skepticism, you do not fight it. You do not grant it a narrative. You acknowledge it as old data, static from a decommissioned tower. You observe it. You let it pass, and you return, calmly and implacably, to the running of your scene. You are retraining a deep system. Expect feedback, but do not obey it. This process has a tipping point, a moment of critical mass. The subconscious, after sufficient repetition, accepts the new impression as its operational truth. It crosses a threshold. From that moment forward, it begins to work for you, autonomously. It solves problems you are not consciously working on. It attracts people and resources aligned with your goal. It guides your intuition with uncanny precision. You have successfully flashed new firmware. The physics are immutable. A persistent impression creates a persistent reality. The weight of your repeated inner state bends the probability field. It collapses quantum potential into a single inevitable timeline. You are not waiting for something to happen. You are allowing the thing you have already impressed upon your deeper mind to unfold into visibility. So you continue, day after day. Not with the anxiety of a beggar, but with the calm precision of a technician. You are applying the formula. You are following the protocol. The outcome is not in question. It is a mathematical certainty, given sufficient application of the correct variable. The variable is your persistent, felt assumption. The constant is the law of mind. The world will shift. It must. You have altered the deepest gravitational center within your own being. Everything in orbit must adjust. Your impression is now the dominant mass. Everything else is just debris, slowly falling into a new, harmonious alignment. The unfolding has begun. Your only task is to not interrupt it. Chapter 8. The Protocol for Unbounded Potential. The unfolding has begun. Your only task is to not interrupt it. This is the final protocol, the operational directive for a system that is now fully online. You have conducted the audit. You have isolated the static. You have reclaimed command. You have engineered the new design. You have impressed it upon the substrate of your mind with relentless precision. The internal architecture is complete. The structure is sound. It is under load. It is bearing the weight of a new reality. Now you must learn to inhabit it, not as a visitor, not as a temporary occupant, but as its absolute and sovereign authority. This is the transition from construction to command, from assembly to activation. This is where potential ceases to be a concept. It becomes an environment, the air you breathe, the ground you walk on. It becomes unbounded. Unbounded potential is not a promise of infinite toys. It is not a license for whimsy. It is a state of structural integrity. It is the realization that the constraints you perceived were load-bearing walls made of plaster. They were facades. You have poured the true foundations now. in reinforced concrete, anchored to bedrock. The design parameters have been rewritten, the safety factors have been removed. The system is engineered for stresses you once considered catastrophic. Your old life was a series of load tests. Each disappointment, each failure, each external resistance, it was a stress applied to a flawed design, to a structure built on compromised soil. You watched it crack, you felt it groan, you assumed the load was too great. The pressure was the problem. This was a diagnostic error. The pressure was the gift. It revealed every fault line, every point of failure. It showed you, with brutal clarity, exactly where you needed to reinforce, where you needed to demolish and rebuild. Now you operate from a different tensile strength. The same pressures will return. They must. This is how a structure proves itself. But they will meet a different material, a different geometry. They will meet a monocoque chassis, where there was once a frame of brittle sticks. The pressure will no longer cause deformation. It will cause compaction. It will increase density. It will prove the design. The protocol is simple, deceptively so. It has only one active phase and one passive law. The active phase is your daily practice, the ritual of impression. You know this now. It is not affirmation. It is not wishing. It is the precise, emotional, sensory re-simulation of your completed design. You enter the state as if it is already true. You feel the textures of that reality. You hear its frequencies. You operate from its calm, unshakable center. You do this with the discipline of a technician performing a critical systems check. This is not motivational. It is maintenance. It is ensuring the internal signal remains the dominant broadcast. Clear, coherent, uninterrupted. The passive law is non-interference. This is the true test of the architect. You have issued the command. You have impressed the blueprint upon the quantum substrate. The field is reorganizing. Particles are collapsing into the pattern of your instruction. Your work now is to not send a countermanding order, to not, in a moment of doubt or impatience, reintroduce the old static, the old frequency of lack, of questioning, of how. How is not your department. How is the domain of the field, the infinite intelligence, the subconscious mind in its cosmic operation. Your department is the what. The what is your design, your command, your state. When you ask how, you are essentially querying the construction crew. You are leaning over their shoulder. You are second-guessing the methods of a process you hired for its expertise. You introduce hesitation. You corrupt the signal with a frequency of uncertainty. You must stop. Your faith is not blind belief. It is engineering confidence. You have built a bridge according to the laws of physics. You do not stand at the edge and wonder if gravity will suspend its rules for you. You walk across. Your confidence is in the law, in the material, in the precision of your own work. The law of mind is no different. It is as reliable as gravity, as predictable as tensile strength. Your confidence is in the law and in the fidelity of your own impression. Therefore, the protocol for unbounded potential is this. Maintain the signal. Withdraw from the construction site. Do not monitor progress. Do not look for validation in the rubble of the old world. The new construction is not always visible from the ground. It is being assembled in the quantum shipyard. It will be launched when it is seaworthy. When every system is go, your looking for it is a signal of its absence. Your calm assurance is a signal of its inevitable arrival. Live from the end. This phrase is often misunderstood. It does not mean to pretend. It means to allow the internal reality to dictate your external posture, your emotional baseline, your decisions. If your design is financial sovereignty, you make decisions from a place of calm abundance, not frantic scarcity. You do not hoard pennies while broadcasting fear. You invest. You expand. You act as a conduit for flow. If your design is in vulnerable health, you move and nourish your body as a temple of vitality, not as a patient awaiting a diagnosis. Your actions become congruent with the completed state. They are not efforts to achieve it. They are expressions of it. This congruence is the final gear in the mechanism. It aligns your conscious actions with your subconscious command. It eliminates all interference. The world perceives this congruence. It responds to it as a fixed fact, a completed event. People will begin to interact with the man you have become, not the man you were. Opportunities will coalesce around the new frequency you emit. They are not miracles. They are resonant matches. They are the logical, lawful output of a reconfigured system. There will be a void, the space between the old reality fading and the new one solidifying. This void is critical. It is the silence between the command and the confirmation. Do not rush to fill this silence with noise, with old patterns, with anxious action. This silence is the gestation period. It is the field at work. Your job is to hold the frequency, to be the still point, the unwavering datum. This is unbounded potential. It is the realization that the only boundary ever was your acceptance of one, your belief in a ceiling, your subscription to a law of diminishing returns. You have cancelled that subscription. You have designed a system that operates on a different principle, the principle of infinite expansion, of recursive growth, where every output becomes fuel for a greater input, where your state of fulfillment generates more reasons for fulfillment. It becomes a self-reinforcing loop, a gravitational well that pulls more of its own reality into existence. You are no longer building. You are inhabiting. You are no longer impressing. You are being. The architecture is complete. It is live. Now walk its halls. Command its systems. Look out from its vantage point. This is the protocol. Operate from the citadel and watch with serene authority as the world reconstitutes itself to match the view. Chapter 9. The Integration of the New Self. The view from the citadel is not a passive panorama. It is an active field of command. The architecture you have built is not a static monument. It is a dynamic operating system, a living protocol. Your consciousness is now the central processing unit. Every sensory input, every external event, is now data streamed into this sovereign system. It is processed through the new algorithms of your being. The old software of reaction has been permanently deleted. There is no backup, no restore point. You are running on a clean, purpose-built build. The integration phase has begun. This is the critical transition, the shift from construction to occupation, from installation to execution. The blueprint is realized, the wiring is live. Now you must learn to live within the walls you have engineered, to move through the spaces you have defined. This is where theory meets the friction of reality, where the new self is stress-tested against the inertia of the old world. Integration is not a gentle process. It is a deliberate, sometimes jarring recalibration of every reflex, every instinct, every autonomic response. You will feel the ghost of the old architecture, phantom pains from demolished walls. The subconscious, now reprogrammed, will occasionally ping the old addresses, seeking the familiar pathways of lack, limitation, and reaction. These are not failures. They are system echoes, residual static from a decommissioned broadcast. Your role now is not to fight the echo. It is to ignore it, to continue transmitting the new, dominant signal with such coherence that the echo fades into irrelevance. You do not argue with a ghost. You simply inhabit a different house. The protocol for this phase is operational discipline. You are the sole operator in the control room. The screens display the external world. but you no longer mistake the display for the source code. A challenging event appears on the monitor. The old self would have reached for the panic button, would have initiated a cascade of emotional reactions. The integrated self observes the event, classifies it as data, and runs it through the new protocol. The question is no longer, why is this happening to me? The command is, process this input according to the design parameters of my chosen state. This is the essence of integration, making the internal state your default operating system. Your emotional and psychological homeostasis is now set to your design specification. Peace is not an occasional achievement. It is the baseline. Confidence is not a reaction to success. It is the ambient temperature of your being. Abundance is not a future condition. It is the fundamental law of your internal economy. The external world will send weather, storms of doubt, winds of opposition, cold fronts of delay. Your architecture is climate-controlled. The external weather does not dictate the internal environment. The systems maintain the set point. Consider a practical scenario. The financial projection. You have impressed upon the subconscious a state of sovereign financial flow. The architecture of that belief is complete. Now, an invoice goes unpaid. A deal stalls. The market dips. The old blueprint would interpret this as confirmation of scarcity. It would trigger anxiety, a frantic search for external fixes. The integrated self receives the same data, but the processing is different. The stalled deal is not proof of lack. It is recognized as a temporal mismatch, a lag between the internal signal and external reorganization. The response is not anxiety. It is a recalibration of focus, a deliberate return to the sensory feeling of the state already achieved. You lean into the certainty of the architecture. You feel the solidity of the completed design. From that vantage point, you issue commands. You take actions. But those actions are born from fullness, not fear. They are extensions of the state, not desperate attempts to achieve it. This is the tangible application, the moment-to-moment choice of processor. You are constantly choosing which mental circuitry to activate, the old, frayed wires of doubt, or the new, high-bandwidth channels of your design. Integration means the new circuitry becomes the path of least resistance. It becomes automatic. The feeling you once had to consciously cultivate now rises unbidden. It meets the day before the day begins. You wake up inhabiting the state. You do not need to construct it each morning. You simply boot up into it. There will be stress tests. People from your past will engage with the ghost of who you were. They will speak to the old identity. Expect the version of you that reacted, that was insecure, that sought validation. Your discipline is to respond from the citadel, to answer the ghost's name with the sovereign's silence, to interact only from the integrated self. This will confuse them. It may provoke them. Their confusion is not your signal to downgrade. It is evidence of your upgrade. Do not explain your architecture to those who only understand tense. Simply reside within it. The final stage of integration is seamless expression. Your thoughts, words, and actions become a unified broadcast. There is no internal conflict, no hidden committee debating the protocol. The executive function is absolute. When you speak, it is from the certainty of the design. When you act, it is with the precision of the blueprint. This coherence is your most powerful tool. It cuts through the noise of the world like a focused beam. It attracts circumstances that resonate with its frequency. It repels what does not align. Not through effort, through pure vibrational physics. You are not waiting for a new life. You are performing a new life. The stage is your current reality. The script is your internal state. The performance is so convincing, so utterly authentic, that the stage itself is compelled to change its sets, to provide new props, new supporting actors. The integration is complete when you forget you are performing, when the role and the actor are one, when the citadel is not where you live, it is what you are. The walls are your discipline. The vantage point is your perception. The command center is your unwavering focus. From here, creation is not an act. It is an atmosphere. You breathe out intention, and the world breathes back form. The integration is silent, total, and irrevocable. The new self is no longer new. It is simply self. The architect has become the inhabitant. The blueprint has become the world. Now, operate. Chapter 10. The Sovereign Construct. Operation is not a passive state. It is a continuous act of engineering. A sovereign construct does not merely exist. It is maintained. It is defended. It is iterated upon with the cold precision of a master strategist. The inhabitant is now the commandant. The world you have built is now your fortress, your territory, your domain of absolute influence. This is the final phase of the design. The psychological blueprint of resistance has been audited. The static has been silenced. The new self is integrated and operational, yet a structure, no matter how perfectly engineered, exists within an environment. That environment exerts pressure. It tests integrity. It seeks points of failure. Your sovereignty, therefore, is not a declaration. It is a perimeter, a non-negotiable boundary defined by your internal command. The deepest strata of friction are no longer ancestral ghosts. They are now known quantities. Mapped vulnerabilities in your psychological terrain. You have identified them, isolated them. You understand their architecture. Their purpose was to constrain, to limit the flow of potential through you. These strata are not enemies to be fought. They are inert geological formations. You build your fortress upon them, or you tunnel through them. But you do not petition them for permission. Murphy's work provides the audit, the forensic isolation of mental static. Every thought of lack, every whisper of unworthiness, every inherited narrative of struggle. These are not feelings. They are sabotage protocols, running on old, unauthorized code. Your audit has catalogued them, has given each one a file name, a source frequency. You do not argue with static. You identify its broadcast coordinates, and you cease transmission. The transition is complete. You are no longer a victim of circumstance, reacting to external noise. You are the conscious designer, the architect who reclaimed the command console. This reclamation is absolute. Your focus is no longer a lens that the world turns. It is a directed energy weapon. You choose the target. You dictate the terms of engagement. Your attention is the most valuable currency in existence, and you are no longer spending it. You are investing it with ruthless specificity. Consider the tactical evolution this demands. Previously, you managed energy. Now you command coherence. Energy is a scalar quantity. It can be high or low, spent or saved. Coherence is a vector. It possesses both magnitude and precise direction. A laser with minimal total energy achieves profound work because of its perfect coherence. Your mind, once a diffuse bulb of anxious energy, must now become that laser. Every decision, every withheld reaction, every moment of focused work is an act of aligning your psychological photons. The external chaos is merely the ambient light against which your coherent beam defines itself. It cannot extinguish you. It only makes your cut more visible. Sovereignty is built in the silent moments between actions. It is the unshakable protocol that runs when no one is watching, when pressure mounts, when old patterns scream for reactivation. This is where the construct is tested. This is where you operate. You do not feel your way into right action. You act from the sovereign protocol, and the feeling follows as a confirmation signal. This protocol has a distinct architecture. It is not a list of rules. It is an executable sequence with conditional logic. If a stimulus of perceived insult arrives, then the protocol queries, does this data alter the core mission parameters? The answer is always negative. The protocol then executes the subroutine, neutral data processing. It logs the event, extracts any tactical intelligence on the sender's own limitations, and archives it. No emotional payload is deployed. No identity subroutine is triggered. The system returns to standby, power undrained. This is the automation of virtue. You are not controlling your temper. You have decommissioned the entire emotional circuit that defined temper as a relevant response. The old software has been uninstalled. The new protocol simply sees no compatible file type. Your internal state is now the primary datum. The external world is secondary feedback. You process this feedback as information, not as identity. Praise does not expand you. Criticism does not diminish you. Both are simply data points on your strategic dashboard. They inform adjustments. They never alter the core mission. The blueprint is fixed. The execution is adaptable. Expand this principle into the realm of ambition. The world does not give you a purpose. It presents a field of affordances and constraints. Your sovereign purpose is the magnetic field you generate that aligns metallic particles of opportunity from the chaos. Without that internal field, you are merely sifting through dust. With it, the relevant elements are drawn to your perimeter. You stop chasing. You begin selecting. The how is often revealed by the what that is attracted to the intensity and clarity of your command signal. Your job is not to figure out every step. Your job is to maintain the signal's purity. The path manifests as a series of cleared gates, each one opening only when you stand before it with the correct resonant frequency. This requires a garrison mentality, a disciplined, daily recommitment to the internal order you have engineered. You are not seeking new experiences to define you. You are imposing your definition upon all experiences. The world will send emissaries of chaos. They will wear familiar faces. They will speak in the old language of doubt. Your response is not negotiation. It is a closed system, a silent return to the frequency of your design. The garrison's strength is tested by siege. A siege is not an emergency. It is a prolonged state of pressure designed to provoke a lapse in protocol. Financial pressure, social isolation, prolonged uncertainty, these are not misfortunes. They are stress tests of your architectural integrity. In these moments, you do not seek motivation. You fall back on doctrine. The doctrine is this. The protocol is the path. You execute the morning ritual, not because you feel like it, but because it is the daily recalibration of the garrison's walls. You engage in the deep work, not because inspiration struck, but because it is the scheduled manufacturing run for your value. The siege reveals where your mortar is weak. It shows you, in real time, which vulnerabilities you only theorized about but have not yet hardened. A siege, therefore, is not to be feared. It is the most valuable diagnostic tool in existence. The sovereign construct is impregnable from the outside. Its only point of failure is internal, a moment of negligence, a nostalgic lapse into the victim's perspective, a voluntary surrender of command. This is why operation is a perpetual act. You are the sole sentry, the only operator with clearance codes to your own mind. Guard this access with your life. This guard duty has a technical specification. It is the maintenance of a negative capability. Not the poet's romantic uncertainty, but the engineer's capacity to hold a system in a state of potential without premature discharge. You hold your conclusions lightly. You hold your identity as a hypothesis. You hold your desires as magnetic coordinates, not as frantic needs. This negative space around your core processes is what allows for rapid iteration. The man who is fused to his current self cannot upgrade. The sovereign operator runs his self as a virtual machine, performing flawlessly in the moment, yet always ready to be migrated to a more powerful host of his own design at the next scheduled update. You now build from a foundation of silence, not the silence of absence, the silence of immense potential, a charged void. Ready to take the shape of your next command. Your thoughts are no longer random visitors. They are drafted personnel, each one selected for a specific function within the grand design. You deploy them with intention. You retire them without sentiment. This silence is the bandwidth of creation. Before, your mental spectrum was crowded with the chatter of 1,000 civilian broadcasts, news, opinions, others' agendas, your own ancient dramas. You have now cleared the spectrum. What remains is dead air. But in telecommunications, dead air is not empty. It is the carrier wave, the steady, unmodulated signal upon which meaningful information can be imposed. Your will is the modulation. Your decisions are the packets of data sent across this clear channel. The clarity of your output is directly proportional to the silence you maintain on your input. You are no longer a receiver picking up the world's noise. You are a transmitter, broadcasting a single coherent signal on a frequency you own. The resistance is gone, not because the world changed, but because you reclassified it. What was once a wall is now raw material. What was once noise is now neutral bandwidth. You have isolated the static, and in that isolation you found its power source. You disconnected it. The silence that remains is not empty. It is full. It is the sound of pure, undiluted potential, waiting for your next decree. This is the final truth of the architect. You do not wait for a sovereign path to appear. You stop looking for paths altogether. You declare the ground beneath your feet sovereign territory by the authority of your conscious design. Every step you take is the path. Every decision you make is the law. The construct is not a place you arrive at. It is the act of arrival itself, perpetual, unbending, yours. Therefore, operation moves into its ultimate expression, legacy coding. You begin to write protocols not just for yourself, but for systems that will outlast you. Your business, your creations, your influence, these become externalized expressions of your internal order. They are not separate from you. They are your command line interface with eternity. You code them with the same ruthless clarity, the same defensive architecture, the same adaptive loops. You are no longer just building a self. You are building a self-replicating pattern of order, a strain of sovereignty that can be transmitted, that can transform the chaos it touches into a mirror of its own functional elegance. The mission is no longer personal. It is architectural. You are a principle, incarnate, and principles, once activated in the world, seek their own fulfillment. Now command. Conclusion. The activated design. The blueprint is no longer a document. It is a living system. You began with a theory of resistance, a map of the static that distorts signal. You performed the audit, isolating every frequency of fear and inherited narrative. You dismantled the victim's scaffold and assumed the architect's stance. Command was reclaimed, not given. You learned the formula: isolate, intend, impress, integrate. You applied the mechanics, rewiring circuits with the cold precision of a surgeon. You understood architecture, that beliefs are load-bearing structures, not decorations. You mastered the physics, knowing that only persistent, coherent impression forges a new substrate of self. You executed the protocol. You engaged with potential not as a wish, but as a field to be tuned. You integrated the new self through relentless operational proof. Action became the only valid credential. You stand now within the sovereign construct. It is not a destination. It is an active tense, a perpetual state of conscious authorship. This conclusion is not an ending. It is the ignition sequence. The design is activated. The system is online. The static is cleared. The channel is open. What transmits now is entirely, irrevocably your own signal. Go build.